Great Britain is believed by many people to be among the fairest countries in the whole world. Great Britain has a free national health service, free schools and education, free meals for the poorest kids at the school, cheap or sometimes even rent-free houses for the poorest people in Britain, good opportunity, freedom of speech, local and national elections, and freedom of choice. With all this, Britain surely really is a great, fair country. But Great Britain has huge problems. It's the same problems that so many other civilizations have had or still have. One of the problems is greed. This is why there is a Tesco in nearly every town and city, killing local businesses while only providing minimum wage, dead-end jobs. Tesco Bank, Tesco Insurance, Tesco Mobile, Tesco Opticians, Tesco Pharmacy, Tesco Clothing, employees of factories making clothes for Georgette Asta, Tesco and Primark said their wages were so low that, despite working up to 84-hour weeks, they struggled to provide for their families. There were also reports of physical and verbal abuse by supervisors and of workers being sacked for taking sick leave. Charities campaigning for workers' rights accuse retailers of maximizing profits by demanding rock-bottom prices from suppliers in the developing world. According to a report by The Guardian, on July 16, 2007. A damaging BBC Panorama investigation alleges that Britain's biggest retailer, which made £2.8 billion profit last year, is being supplied by an Indian factory where textile workers earn, on average, £8.75 for a 54-hour, 6-day week. The lowest paid receive less than £7 a week. The investigation revealed that children as young as 11 were working in squalid conditions, sewing tiny beads and sequins onto cheap t-shirts by candlelight, for as little as 16 pence an hour. Tesco owns enough land to build at least another 175 more superstores, and there are already a total of 2,184 Tesco stores in the UK. They make billions of pounds every year and bankrupt local businesses. Despite these ridiculous profits, the unemployed in Great Britain are sent working for Tesco and McDonald's for free, all paid for by the taxpayer. David Cameron keeps talking about Britain's deficit. We are all in this together. There has been public sector cuts, housing benefit cuts, and talks of NHS cuts and changes moving towards privatization, meaning Tesco hospitals coming soon.
Now, it is Britain's largest private employer, but today Tesco buckled under pressure over its use of unpaid work experience staff and announced that they will now be paid. It's a blow for the government, which has spent days defending the right of high street chains to have work experience candidates work for free. A host of other major names are also distancing themselves from the programme, including Pizza Hut, Superdrug, and in the last hour, Arcadia, a clothing giant which owns BHS. Our social affairs editor Jackie Long has this report.
We won't work if you won't pay.
A small protest and a simple message, but it began to gather momentum.
No pay, no way.
With more protests planned at Tesco stores across the country, the company moved today to counter accusations that it was using benefit claimants for unpaid labour.
Today we're also announcing a 4-week paid work experience with a guaranteed job at the end of that if it's completed successfully. And that's to give people the choice. Some people may not be in a position where they can come off benefits.
It was this offer in an online advert last week to work full-time for Tesco, but only get benefit, that thrust the company into the eye of the storm. Posted on the Job Centre Plus website, it provoked huge criticism. It started out as an advert on the internet for a night shift worker at Tesco's, but it's turned into a massive row about the rights and wrongs of making unemployed people work for their benefits. Is it, as the government argues, valuable work experience or free labour for some of the country's multi-billion-pound companies? Today, Tesco has moved to clarify its position, and it's not the only company having second thoughts. Channel 4 News has learnt that Burger King and Pizza Hut are both reviewing their involvement in the scheme. Electrical store Maplins pulled out last night, while TK Maxx, Waterstones, Sainsbury's, Matalan and Superdrug have all chosen not to take part.
Did you all know each other beforehand? Or?
Even as private companies moved away from one government work scheme, the Deputy Prime Minister was announcing another one, also dependent on private firms stepping in. The scheme, worth £126 million, is aimed at some of the most poorly educated and low-skilled teenagers in the country. The job of finding them work will be left to private companies and charities who will be paid by result.
We will pay them if they can show us that they can help those 16 and 17-year-olds to, if you like, get off the sofa, get away from the television and enter into the real world of work and training and education.
This is my agreement.
Ewan Natty says he's desperate to join Mr Clegg's real world of work. He has a degree in electrical engineering, but is now looking for any job at all, as long as it's paid. He says government plans to make him do unpaid work experience as part of the work programme are simply not right.
You have to give 30 hours of your service without no pay for 4 weeks.
But what's wrong with that? Why shouldn't you go and do some sort of work experience in return for your benefits?
Because I am already have a Bachelor of Engineering degree, and I've done my hard work to achieve this goal, and I'm now expecting to find a job that I can pay my way through society. I don't want to be giving my service to any organisation for free of charge.
Tesco's move today clearly leaves them feeling more comfortable. No one who does work experience with them will lose their benefit if they leave. The big question now is, will other companies follow suit, and where that will leave the government's plans.
Tesco is not the only disgraceful rip-off in Britain. The London 2012 Olympics has run £2 billion over budget and the security costs have doubled. The Olympics will cost the British taxpayer £11 billion according to a report by the Commons Public Accounts Committee. Union leader Len McCluskey told The Guardian that unions could stage industrial action as part of their campaign against government cuts. He called for the public to engage in civil disobedience to defend public services during the fortnight of sport this summer. Len McCluskey said no precise plans had been drawn up for action during the London Games, but added that they absolutely could include strikes. Downing Street said the union leader's threat of strikes to disrupt the Olympics is completely unacceptable and unpatriotic. Even Labour leader Ed Miliband, whose party is largely funded by union donations, condemned Mr. McCluskey's comments. Any threat to the Olympics is totally unacceptable and wrong. He said this is a celebration for the whole country and must not be disrupted. What exactly are the British people supposed to be celebrating? Britain's £850 billion taxpayer bailout of the corrupt banks? Or Britain's criminal members of Parliament that have falsely claimed millions of pounds on their expenses? Stealing millions from the taxpayer, looting from the economy, and getting away with it, while locking up Danielle Conze, A-level student who stole 2 left-footed trainers in Britain's riots. She was jailed for a shocking 10 months.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for welcoming me here on this great day when you're announcing the creation of an extra 20,000 jobs over the next 2 years. It's got off to a better start than some of the meetings I've been to. I went to a school the other day and they couldn't say who was coming, so they just told everyone in advance that it was someone very important called David. And when I arrived, 3 children left in tears because they were hoping for David Beckham rather than David Cameron. So at least that hasn't happened. But I just want to say 3 things. I mean, the first is I think this is a really important announcement, not just for Tesco, but important announcement for the country. As you know, we desperately need the private sector to grow and to create jobs because we're trying to rebalance our economy. Inevitably, as we see government spending that has to be cut back, that does mean jobs get lost in the public sector, and we need to create those jobs in the private sector. And in Tesco, you're leading the way, 20,000 jobs over the next 2 years, when you're already the largest private sector employer in the country. So it's very impressive. But the second thing I wanted to say was particularly to draw attention to what you're doing with apprenticeships. The government has put a lot of money and effort behind apprenticeships. We've got something like 400,000 apprenticeship starts this year, and the 10,000 that you're announcing is really incredibly welcome. Third and final thing I wanted to say was just to thank you for taking part in the work experience scheme. I think this is really important. If we're going to try and give young people a chance in what is a tough and difficult job market, it's really important there are work experience schemes so that young people, many of whom haven't had a job at all, haven't had experience in the workplace at all, get that chance by going to work for a great established business like Tesco. And all the evidence from the work experience scheme so far is around 30,000 people have done it. What we're seeing is around half of those are getting offered chances to work and chances to work full-time or part-time. So it's a successful scheme, and to those people who want to attack it, who claim that somehow they're standing up for the right to work, we should have no truck with that and say, actually, work experience is a good thing, it's good for young people, it's right that businesses are taking part, and it gives young people a start. Every little helps, as they say, so many congratulations, well done today, and thank you for letting me come along and enjoy the announcement that you've been making. Thank you very much indeed.
Maybe Ed Miliband thinks Britain should celebrate the failing education system. The quality of a child's education in Britain depends on where you're born and how much money your family has. The education system in Great Britain undeniably and massively favors the upper classes. In a speech to the Policy Exchange think tank in June, Education Secretary Michael Gove said, as a country, only about half our pupils manage at least A, C, in both English and Maths GCSE. In Singapore, it's 4 out of 5. In the last decade, we have plummeted down the International League tables, from 4th to 16th place in science, from 7th to 25th place in literacy, and from 8th to 28th in maths. This stagnation leaves children poorly prepared for the world we face." Unquote.
An educated, healthy and confident nation is harder to govern. And I think there's an element in the thinking of some people. We don't want people to be educated, healthy and confident because they would get out of control. The top 1% of the world's population own 80% of the world's wealth. It's incredible that people put up with it. But they're poor, they're demoralized, they're frightened.
What is Great Britain's Education Secretary Michael Gove going to do about Britain's failing educational system in poor areas? Where will he spend the taxpayers' hard-earned money? The Education Secretary writes, in spite, and perhaps because of the austere times, the celebration should go beyond those of previous jubilees and mark the greater achievement that the Diamond Anniversary represents. Michael Gove writes in a letter to fellow ministers, "I feel strongly that the Diamond Jubilee gives us a tremendous opportunity to recognize in a very fitting way the Queen's highly significant contribution to the life of the nation and the Commonwealth. My suggestion would be a gift from the nation to Her Majesty. thinking about David Willetts' excellent suggestion of a royal yacht, and something tangible to commemorate this momentous occasion. He adds, the year ahead provides an enormous opportunity to showcase the very best of Britain. A royal yacht? The new vessel will cost around £80 million to build, at a time of cuts to public services and even talks of NHS cuts. Conservative donor Lord Ashcroft has even pledged a donation of £5 million to the fund to buy the royal family a new yacht to celebrate the Queen's Diamond Jubilee. Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg says he suspects the public would object to the idea of a new royal yacht. What makes him think that? It's a shame that he did not suspect that lying to students about tuition fees for years might piss them off. Nick Clegg also suspected that the Tory cuts and tuition fee rises could start riots, but it did not stop him from choosing to join the Tory party instead of Labour, despite the fact Labour and the Lib Dems were both against the Tory cuts and both against a rise in tuition fees. Maybe Ed Miliband thinks Britain should celebrate the demise of the Labour Party, Tory Blair's oil wars, or Britain's media and the elite, controlling elections with propaganda, donations and airtime. The mainstream media focus almost purely on the big three, Labour, Conservative, and the Lib Dems. All three parties want war in the Middle East. The proven liar Nick Clegg said he was against the illegal invasion of Iraq, but all three parties supported the invasion of Libya. All three parties supported the bank bailouts. All three parties are pro-European Union. All three parties were involved in the shameful expenses scandals. None of these parties talk of Tesco's terrible human rights record, child labor, and price fixing. None of the three parties have stopped the banks paying out ridiculous bonuses, or stopped the banks from handing out bank charges of up to £300 per week. In fact, in November 2009, the Supreme Court overturned earlier court rulings that allowed the Office of Fair Trading to investigate the fairness of charges for unauthorized overdrafts, effectively legalizing these ridiculous bank charges. These bank charges are handed out to the poorest people in Britain. Nationwide Building Society would sometimes charge £200 per week in bank charges just because people did not have the money to pay their bills on time. They charge £30 per missed direct debit, and a £20 overdraft fee if their charges put you in the red. In this case, the victim of these unfair charges was a single mother of 2 children. Nationwide Building Society left her with no money for food, electric, and other essentials. Where does that money go? Millions of pounds taken from the poorest people in Britain to pay for Nationwide Building Society's sponsorship of the already overpaid, undertaxed, overrated and underachieving England football team. And paying fat cats at Nationwide Building Society fat bonuses. Yet if I have £1 million in the bank account with 5% interest, the bank will pay me £50,000 a year in interest. The system helps keep the poor entrapped in the system, and the rich, filthy fucking rich. The mainstream media in Britain is controlled by the rich and powerful. the mainstream media in Britain does not expose greedy bankers. Instead they go after benefits fraudsters and benefits claimers. On the 12th of August 2010 the Sun declared war on the feckless benefits claimants to slash the £5 billion wasted in Britain's shambolic handouts culture. It's a shame they did not declare war on feckless bankers and stop the £850 billion handout for the bank bailout.
The real story, the sheer size of this bailout. He couldn't bring himself to actually give us the figure in the House of Commons. £39.2 billion, equivalent to £2,000 per family, bigger even than the bailout last autumn. And with the Royal Bank of Scotland, it now breaks a new world record as the single biggest bailout of any single bank anywhere in the globe. Now, of course, he presents this as positive government action, but he had little choice because the alternative was seeing RBS unable to fulfil the basic requirements of a solvent bank. But it results in a bailout that is bigger than that to Citigroup, bigger than that to the Bank of America, indeed all into a bank who, we must remember, the former chief executive of which was knighted for banking services by the Prime Minister of this government. And in return for this huge slug of money, there is still no guarantee that it will get lending flowing in the real economy or help real businesses stay afloat or keep people in work. And the Chancellor wants us to believe this is a new era for British banking, when in truth the British people are being presented with yet another enormous bill to try to clear up the mess from the old era of irresponsible banking supervision over which this Labour government presided.
Personally, I think levels of pay in banking and in financial services are too high and they're out of kilter with the rest of society. I've said this many times. And I think people need to, be aware of the current economic situation. When it comes to the banks where we have a shareholding in them, like the Royal Bank of Scotland, look, we run these at arm's length. That's what the last Labour government did when they set up these arrangements and they put all that taxpayers' money in. And I think the alternatives to this bonus that Stephen Hester got would have been worse for the British taxpayer, because either the bonus would have been bigger, and actually it's half the size than it was last year, or the British government would have had to step in and run the Royal Bank of Scotland on a day-to-day basis. That would have been worse for taxpayers, worse for the British economy, worse for the employees of the Royal Bank of Scotland around the country, and also worse for those businesses that depend on the Royal Bank for their loans.
Chancellor George Osborne delivered his budget for 2012. Tobacco products will rise by 5% above inflation. George Osborne explains, smoking remains the biggest cause of preventable illness and premature death in the UK. There is clear evidence that increasing the cost of tobacco encourages smokers to quit and discourages young people from taking it up. That's over £7 for 20 cigarettes. That would buy you 3 Happy Meals, or 1 Big Mac meal, 1 cheeseburger and a McFlurry. So why not tax McDonald's, or Coca-Cola? Half a pint of Coca-Cola contains 14 teaspoons of sugar. Instead they are building the world's biggest McDonald's for the Olympics. Tobacco products do not come with a toy. They are not allowed to advertise. McDonald's is just as dangerous as tobacco products, and it's aimed at children. A paper by experts from Oxford University and the World Health Organization Collaborating Center for Obesity Prevention says obesity and poor diet now place the largest economic burden on the NHS of all lifestyle choices. Experts said that while the individual health risks of smoking and excess drinking are high, resulting in billions spent treating liver disease and lung cancer, the far higher numbers of people eating a poor diet had as great an impact on NHS costs. Yet McDonald's, the biggest fast food company in the world, and Coca-Cola are allowed to carry on, with no health warning, bribing children with cheap toys and a stupid clown, advertising on children's TV and sponsoring the 2012 Olympics. Obesity rates have quadrupled in the past 25 years in Britain. 1 in 4 adults are now overweight. This is just another example of the hypocrisy of the British government. George Osborne's budget was also criticized for what many people call the granny tax. George Osborne said no pensioner will lose in cash terms, but HM Revenue and Customs estimates that in 2013 to 2014, 4.41 million people will be worse off in real terms, thanks to inflation, with an average loss of £83 a year. Within that total, 360,000 individuals aged 65 will lose an average of £285, while 230,000 people will be brought into income tax for the first time. The hardest hit are those turning 65 in 2013. They will lose £323 annually. At the same time, George Osborne cuts the top rate of tax in Britain from 50 to 45%. That's a tax cut for the rich and pension and NHS cuts for the poor. Maybe that's what David Cameron and the 15 donors who between them gave the Conservative Party £25 million planned at the secret dinners. Those who dine with the Prime Minister without civil servants present to take notes were some of the richest men and women in the country. At least one had openly called on ministers to scrap the 50p rate of income tax, the abolition of which was announced in last week's budget. Tax cuts for the rich, pension cuts, child benefit cuts and NHS cuts, all to fund the £850 billion bank bailout. The banks are still paying out ridiculous bonuses and handing out ridiculous bank charges to the poorest people in Britain. Oil wars in Libya have cost at least £200 million. The cost of fighting and reconstruction in Iraq and Afghanistan has passed £20 billion. Of that, £18 billion was spent on military operations, on top of the defence budget, while hundreds of millions went on aid and security for UK officials. The final cost, which does not include troop salaries or care for the wounded, is expected to be much higher. How do the government get away with wasting hundreds of billions of pounds to fund wars and bail out corrupt banks? It's easy.
And today they have just announced the new judges for excellence.
New judges were unveiled for the X Factor last night.
Britain! It is back! Tonight, a new chapter begins with the next generation. Kelly Rowland.
Show us what you got.
Talisa.
What is wrong with you?
Louis Walsh.
You own that bloody stage.
And Gary Barlow.
And you just shut your mouth.
All searching for the next big thing.
Hello.
Oh dear.
Bring it on. Freaking love the UK.
Thousands fight to win.
I want it so much. You don't know how much I want it.
An absolute massive no. I've never felt like that, having watched someone sing a song.
I've worked my way on. That's why I'm here today.
No, I don't take kindly to that criticism. Watch your mouth. Watch your mouth.
Watch my lips. You cannot sing.
Robbie Fluid!
I said no.
You lost your mind.
Guys, what are you doing?
If I could crowd surf right now, I totally would. It was brilliant. It was amazing.
It's time!
I want to be a pop star!
Is it too late to resign?
Two-Face!
I don't know if you can really sing.
It's a bit rich coming from you, but...
The music!
That performance is going to change your life.
They saturate the entertainment media with corrupt brain-dead rubbish like Britain's Got Talent, X Factor, EastEnders, Coronation Street. The list is endless. They use talentless pricks like Jeremy Clarkson. He goes on TV and condemns the strikes like the puppet he is. In January 2010 it was revealed that Jeremy Clarkson had pocketed an extra £830,000 from Top Gear in addition to his estimated £1 million BBC salary. All paid for by the very people that he is talking about, shooting for, fighting for their pensions, their wages and in some cases their jobs. They use the mainstream media to propagate their agendas like their oil wars in the Middle East. The music industry is saturated with corrupt pop music. Lady Gaga and Rihanna are role models to our youth, yet they are allowed to act like sluts in their music videos. They have had hundreds of millions of views on YouTube. Their videos are most popular with females between 13 and 17 years old. The 2011 X Factor final, watched by around a third of the British population, received thousands of complaints from shocked parents. Rihanna come out as a schoolgirl and then strips. On the family show, Christina Aguilera wore in very low-cut black dresses she cavorted with an army of lingerie-clad dancers. JLS, Jessie J, Cher Lloyd, Katy Perry, Alexandra Burke. The list of corrupt rubbish in the UK charts is massive. Well done, Simon Cowell. The report, commissioned by Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg, that identified poor parenting and a lack of values among young people as the main cause of the looting and violence that gripped English cities during the riots, should have looked at the entertainment industry. Kids today are killing prostitutes on Grand Theft Auto, or watching brain-dead TV.
Wanna try something new, baby?
In, gorgeous.
You know, I really meant that I would do anything.
I'm going to feel like enough of an asshole doing this without people watching me. Shit, there ain't no point in buying cheap.
Come on, baby, I'm going into orbit now. Sweet heavens above, don't stop now. Baby, you know just what I like. Oh, yeah, oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Nick Clegg is a convicted arsonist himself, so his parents must have been terrible to raise such a spineless, bullshitting, two-faced, hypocrite, arsonist, prick. David Cameron, Boris Johnson, and George Osborne were all members of Bullingdon Club, and all blame poor parenting for Britain's riots. Andrew Jimson, biographer of Boris Johnson, reported about the club in the 1980s, "I don't think an evening would have ended without a restaurant being trashed and being paid for in full, very often in cash. A night in the cells would be regarded as being par for a buller man, and so would debagging anyone who really attracted the irritation of the buller men." Are David Cameron, Boris Johnson, and George Osborne all victims of poor parenting, the MP's expenses scandal, cash for access, the phone hacking scandal, and too many donation scandals to mention?
About the world we live in a different way?
Well, yes. This is a piece in the Sunday Telegraph about how the government can spy on your phone calls, texts and emails under new plans that are going to be unveiled later this year. Details of every single phone call, text message, all email traffic and every website visited by members of the public are to be retained for a year. So it's all to do with clamping down on sort of terrorist activity ahead of the Olympic Games. And
there's always an excuse, isn't there? There's always a very good reason to get hold of everything from the government's point of view.
Well, remember when they had the terrorist stop and search?
Yeah.
We had 150,000 stop and searches in 1 year in England, 14 in Scotland. So it just shows, you know, that if you have these things, they're misused. And this isn't just the fact you made a phone call, it's where you made it from. Web access, what site you addressed, you know. This is a resurrection, actually, it's a rebadging, it's a resurrection of something that the previous government had. It's called the IMP, Information Management Programme. It's a terrible idea. It's very bad for civil liberties. It won't help them much. They've got most of the powers they need. They caught the London Glasgow bombers by tracking what they said and who they said it to and so on.
I disagree. I mean, terrorists or people that want to do bad things, they've got so much technology at their fingertips, and it's pretty easy to track. So if it's used correctly and not abused, then surely it's a really good method to actually find the people
with a
that
judge's
do bad
approval, fine. But the general purpose collection of all our data and then easy access to it, that's wrong. You know, you won't find me arguing against using warranted intercepts. Indeed, I want to see it used in court. But this is just a hoovering up exercise, a hunting exercise. It won't work.
They probably do it anyway.
Yeah, they probably do it anyway.
Internet service providers are obliged to keep details of users' web access, email and internet phone calls for 12 months, under an EU directive from 2009. A proposed new law, which the Home Office says will be brought in as soon as parliamentary time allows, would extend those requirements to social networking sites and internet phone services such as Skype. It would also reportedly allow intelligence officers to access emails, calls and texts as they happen, without a warrant, rather than retrospectively, and would tighten up the rules around exactly what data internet service providers must keep. Ministers say change is needed to help fight crime and terrorism.
On the issue of how we have a court system that can both protect people's liberties but also protect our national security, and indeed on the issue of how we handle data, both to protect people's security, but again to make sure we can pursue terrorists and stop terrorist acts taking place. These are difficult issues. They're sensitive issues. They require government to have deep, long conversations and work through some very tough issues. And that is why we published on the court processes, we published a green paper, had a huge engagement with the legal profession, huge engagement with people who care about civil liberties. We're not at the end of that process yet. There will be a Queen's speech later on this year. It's not a secret. In that Queen's speech, I can't reveal the contents, but these are issues that we need to deal with. But there's still time to deal with everybody's concerns. But we need to stand back and look at the big picture. And the big picture is this. Government, Prime Ministers have a responsibility for national security. We should take every step that is necessary to keep the country safe. We shouldn't put our civil liberties at risk by doing so. But where there are gaps that need to be plugged, we need to plug those gaps. We should do that with consultation, with understanding, with respect to our long traditions for liberty in this country. But nevertheless, those gaps have to be dealt with. That's my responsibility. That's one that I intend to fulfill.
David Cameron said gaps in national security must be plugged as he defended plans for more secret court hearings and more internet monitoring. The proposed expansion of the use of secret hearings to civil courts and inquests is intended to ensure the government can contest such cases in the future, rather than settling them to avoid sensitive information being revealed in open court. Sharmi Chakrabarti, director of human rights campaign group Liberty, told the BBC that it would change procedures for people bringing a civil claim against public bodies. It's not just the public and the press that would be cleared out of the courtroom, the claimant and their lawyers will be shut out as well. It would allow the authorities, whether it's the security agencies or the police or whoever, to have a private chat with the judge. That's not justice at all. David Cameron does not care about justice. In fact, if there was any justice in Great Britain, David Cameron would have already been in court defending himself and explaining his role in the phone hacking scandal, the cash for access scandal, the expenses scandal. His expenses were high, but he was allowed to pay it back, unlike the rioters who were hit with the full force of the law.
But yes, I was claiming a large amount.
Now David Cameron wants the right to spy on our emails, our phone calls, and secretly take people to court and even secretly lock people up. Who does he think he is? What is he going to do next? Invade Poland? Of course not. It's much more likely to be an oil-rich country in the Middle East like Iran or Syria, according to David Cameron. The Assad regime is butchering its own people. The history of Homs is being written in the blood of its citizens. It's funny how all these oil-rich countries have evil dictators. It's also ironic that David Cameron insists on fighting wars to protect these people's human rights when at the same time taking human rights from people in Great Britain. The media in Britain ridicule conspiracy theorists. They call them names like crackpots, lunatics. They claim conspiracy theorists are a threat to our nation. Ex-policeman Tony Farrell was sacked over a dossier accusing the government of being behind the 7/7 London bombings. He also claimed the risk from Islamic extremists was zero. Mr. Farrell, a civilian worker for South Yorkshire Police, was sacked after he refused to get his mental state checked by a doctor. Boris Johnson once said the phone hacking scandal was a load of consulate and that it was a conspiracy theory dreamt up by the Labour Party. It of course turned out to be true.
think it's very powerful, and I think it will attract a lot of attention, a lot of interest. And the key thing for me is 10 years on from 9/11, people still believe a load of tripe about this thing. There's lots of stuff on the internet, lots of weird conspiracy theories that people believe. We've got to have a controlled demolition, if you like, of those misconceptions, remind people of the tragedy of what really happened, make sure nothing like that ever happens again. I think if you look at New York and London, they're in many ways very similar. Great metropolises, cosmopolitan, liberal democracies that welcome people, that are full of energy and life and dynamism. And never forget that on 9/11, more Britons died in that attack than in any other attack, any other terrorist attack in this country. And so it was very much an attack on this country as well as on America. I hope people will come and look and be reminded of the pathos and the tragedy of what happened on 9/11. And yes, of course, there's going to be plans to look at a permanent place for this sculpture, and lots of discussions are going on.
If the government really want to end to conspiracy theories, they should stop lying to the British people, stop fighting pointless and expensive wars in the Middle East with taxpayers' money, stop Tesco, Walmart, and Primark from exploiting people with child labor and slavery in Bangladesh and other third-world countries. Instead of spending billions of pounds fighting wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya and Syria, they could spend that money on helping to provide the African people with decent homes, medication and clean water. The government's actions and lies is what causes conspiracy theories. There was no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Why did over 100,000 people die to find that out? Iraq and Saddam Hussein had no involvement in September 11. So why should the British people believe what they are told by our government and media, if not believing what you're being told by liars, fraudsters, and television makes you a conspiracy theorist? Then I am a conspiracy theorist, and everyone should be.
Mohammed Al-Fayed has had his long-awaited day in the witness box. His chance to voice in a court of law his allegations against the royal family and the security services. Even as he left, there were more accusations to be levelled, this time to the waiting press pack.
I am not lying, I'm always talking the truth. They are pretending because they try to portray me like that, but I give them hell.
But the evidence doesn't back you up, does it, Mr. Al?
The evidence? What evidence?
The evidence is that she was not
I'm not talking
pregnant.
to you because you are bloody idiot, you're part of the establishment, and you're a journalist belong. You work for MI6, you idiot.
From the moment he stepped into the witness box, it was an extraordinary spectacle, as he outlined his beliefs that Diana and Dodi were murdered by MI6 on the orders of Prince Philip. But not just Prince Philip. What about Prince Charles, he was asked. He participated in it, Mr. Al-Fayed said, and I am sure he knows what is going to happen, because he would like to get on and marry his Camilla. And this is what happened. They cleared the decks, they finished her, they murder her, and now he is happy. He married his crocodile wife. His language throughout was colourful and at times offensive. He said Diana and Dodi had been slaughtered by terrorists and gangsters. Dodi's ex-girlfriend, Kelly Fisher, was, in Mr. Al-Fayed's words, a hooker and a gold digger. The royals he described as a Dracula family, and Prince Philip, the recipient of most of his vitriol, a racist and a Nazi. As the day went on, the list of those Mr. Al-Fayed claims were involved in the murder or a subsequent cover-up grew and grew. From the Duke of Edinburgh to Diana's sister, Lady Sarah McCorquodale, and her former butler, Paul Burrell, to the emergency services in Paris, and even the former Prime Minister, Tony Blair. It was put to Mr. Al-Fayed that anyone who disagreed with him was in his mind dishonest and a conspirator. But Mr. Al-Fayed said the security services had put up a steel wall to deny him proof. And he told the court he would not rest until he had exposed those responsible for the crime of the century. Sarah Hughes, Sky News at the Royal Courts of Justice.
The British people are tricked into thinking that we live in a free country, with freedom of speech and equal rights for all. This is not true. A 2011 documentary directed by Keith Allen, and funded for by Mohammed Al-Fayed, called Unlawful Killing, a documentary on the allegedly conspiratorial killing of Lady Diana and Dodi Fayed, was banned from Britain. British lawyers insisted on 87 cuts before any UK release could even be contemplated. Baz Bamigboy, from the Mail Online, did review it. He said it was unlawfully dull. He goes on to say, the minute Keith Allen's documentary Unlawful Killing, which purports to be an inquest into the inquest of Princess Diana, was over, a friend turned to me and described the picture as monumental malicious bollocks. I thought she was being polite. Unlawful Killing goes into often tiresome detail on every conspiracy nut's assertion that Princess Diana was murdered by all manner of folk, including the British Secret Services and Prince Philip. Ironically, during this biased, dull, monumental malicious bollocks article, from a biased, dull, monumental malicious bollocks newspaper, Baz Bamigboy from the Mail Online accuses Keith Allen's documentary of being biased, dull, monumental malicious bollocks. When you talk of biased, dull, monumental malicious bollocks, there are few that beat the BBC. A biased, dull, monumental malicious bollocks BBC article on Freemasonry claimed that Freemasons are dogged by conspiracy theories. The BBC hyped up the royal wedding and portrays the dull, monumental malicious royal family as being important and superior to the rest of Britain, as does most of Britain's biased, dull, monumental malicious bollocks mainstream media. Press TV, the Iranian state broadcaster's English-language outlet, has been forced off the air in the UK after Ofcom revoked its license for breaching the broadcasting code. Yvonne Ridley, a former war correspondent who works for Press TV, said the closure of the channel is essentially an act of censorship.
Ofcom has finally decided to remove Press TV from the Sky platform. Ofcom has cited what it calls administrative problems in Press TV's application for a license back in 2007 as the reason for the ban. But media observers say the cited administrative problems are just a pretext to take the satellite channel off air. They say the channel is being removed over its coverage of recent developments in Britain. Press TV gave full coverage of protests against policies of the government of Prime Minister David Cameron. The protesters faced a harsh crackdown. The channel also covered the recent unrest in the country and the heavy-handed security response following the police killing of a young man in London. Press TV questioned the police use of taser guns to kill people and aired interviews shedding light on the torture-to-kill practice. It also analyzed the UK's latest royal wedding from a different perspective. Some analysts featured on the channel's programs criticized the wedding as widely excessive during the current tough economic times when average Britons can hardly make ends meet. Press TV has also criticized Britain's hereditary monarchy and its electoral system as undemocratic. The channel has aired critical views of British people and experts on the country's engagement in the US-led war in Afghanistan. Press TV also interviewed numerous people and analysts questioning the UK's decision to go to the war in Iraq. British media have accused Press TV of airing anti-government and anti-royalty opinions, encouraging Ofcom to ban Press TV. Many viewers have called this an attempt to extinguish the light of truth. Whistleblower website WikiLeaks had also reported earlier that Britain's Foreign Office and the US Embassy in London were mulling ways to limit Press TV's activities. This shows even the United States is concerned about the impact the alternative voice has had on a wide spectrum of people who formerly watched its so-called mainstream media. Now, many observers accuse Ofcom of caving in to the pressure. The media monitoring body never found any concrete evidence to ban Press TV, and instead carried out its mission by using what many call the lamest of excuses to silence the alternative voice. And this occurs in a country which claims to be a major advocate of free speech.
At a time of spending £80 million on the royal yacht, plus millions of pounds on the Diamond Jubilee celebrations, the Olympics, billions of pounds spent on watching steadheads run around in circles, and billions of pounds on war, the government also cut incapacity benefit by over 30% in some cases. Britain's return to recession is very disappointing, said the Prime Minister, but he insisted the government will stick to its program of austerity and deficit reduction. The Office for National Statistics announced the 0.2% decline in gross domestic product (GDP) in the first quarter of the year, which, after a fall of 0.3% the previous quarter, has triggered the UK's first double-dip recession since the 1970s. David Cameron vows in The Sun to fight rebellious peers all the way to enforce a £26,000 a year cap on benefits. He did not fight all the way to enforce a cap on banker bonuses for MPs' expenses.
The thing that people are asking, really, is was there some big deal, some big agreement between me and Rupert Murdoch or James Murdoch that in return for the support for the Conservative Party, I would somehow help their business interests or allow this merger to go through? I mean, that is not true. Rupert Murdoch said it under oath at the Leveson inquiry. James Murdoch said it under oath. I will say it under oath. Look, I did want, and let me be clear, I wanted the support of as many newspapers and as many television commentators for the Conservative Party, because I wanted to take the country in a different direction. That was, and also, when it comes to the Murdoch newspapers, I was trying to convince a set of newspapers who largely had centre-right Conservative views anyway, that they would be better off with a Conservative Party running the country in the way that we would. So, you know, there's no great mystery here. That's what I was trying to do.
The Mirror reports he was meant to be totally impartial, safeguarding the national interest. Instead, Culture Secretary Jeremy Hunt was exposed yesterday as a cheerleader for the Murdoch media empire. And the Tory cabinet minister faced growing pressure to resign last night following shocking evidence to the Leveson inquiry that he secretly colluded with James Murdoch to deliver the controversial £8 billion the Sky-B deal. A series of devastating emails showed Jeremy Hunt's office privately gave Murdoch almost daily updates, regularly drip-feeding information on News Corp's attempt to take over the TV channel, saying it wouldn't be a problem. The inquiry into press standards was told how the Murdochs were given absolutely illegal details on a statement Jeremy Hunt was to give Parliament on the proposed takeover. Jeremy Hunt also personally called James Murdoch after officials said he could not meet them directly. At the time he told MPs his main concern was to reach a decision in a fair and even-handed way. David Cameron's role also came under intense scrutiny after Mr. Murdoch told the inquiry he had briefly talked about the Skype bid at a private dinner party with the PM. Downing Street had previously denied the two men had discussed the issue.
His texts are signed off. Can you help?
In the main.
Well, you probably don't actually, but if I don't ask, people will inquire why the question wasn't asked. But I'm happy to be overruled, frankly.
What was the decision?
Answer the question.
Oh right, sorry, sir. He would sign them off at DC in the main.
Anything else?
Occasionally he would sign them off LOL, lots of love. Actually, until I told him it meant laugh out loud, and then he didn't sign them like that anymore. But
in fact, some of our bigger donors have been for dinner in number 10 Downing Street, in the Prime Minister's private apartment with Samantha. Things will open up for you. It'll be awesome for your business. Yeah. You'll be well pleased because your guests will get photographed with David Cameron. Yeah. We do that, you know.
Within hours of that being made public, Peter Cruddas had resigned. He said he deeply regretted what he described as his bluster during the conversation, adding, clearly there is no question of donors being able to influence policy or gain undue access to politicians.
I think tuition fees are wrong. I think it is wrong to saddle young people with 25,000 quid of debt before they've even taken a first step in adult life. I think it's, our economy has got into trouble because of too much debt for all these wretched bankers in the first place. I believe the public is right behind the approach that we are taking.
George Osborne insists that Britain is heading in the right direction, and he's confident that 2011 won't see the UK consumed by protest.
Good evening. Fires are burning across large parts of London tonight as more serious violence breaks out on the streets of the capital for the third night in a row.
Just briefly, a couple of points here. You've got a bit of a record of this sort of thing, haven't you? When you were 16, you were convicted of arson. You set fire to 2 greenhouses.
The idea that has any relationship with what has been going on in Nottingham or in other cities.
I'm just thinking you might have an empathy with a 16-year-old mind that has a desire to burn things.
Of course I don't have empathy with people who break the law. Of course I don't have empathy with people
you did it.
Destroy their own communities. I didn't do anything like...
You were convicted of arson and given a community sentence.
I was not convicted, and for heaven's sake, to try and make a link between a totally unrelated event, which is nothing like the level of public disorder.
I was only trying to see if you had empathy with the people who were doing this.
I do not. Do you?
Well, I think it would be a more valid and constructive way forward to try and understand what's going on, rather than just threatening people with water cannons and rubber bullets.
I don't think this is time for empathy for people who are breaking the law and trashing their own neighbours. And I think Colonel Gaddafi should, just like all other rulers in the region, start listening to their own people. So I want to make something very clear today. Will I ever join a Conservative government? No. But rioting in the streets, it's a bit much. I think there's a very serious risk. It's simply ludicrous to suggest that someone smashed the window to steal a BlackBerry, to steal the latest pair of Adidas trainers, because they didn't like government policy. They don't like government policy, come and protest in Parliament Square. As it happens, what I was warning about last year was about government protests against government. This wasn't protests against government, it was just a realistic outburst of acquisitive crime. So far, to my knowledge, not a single Liberal Democrat MP has committed the biggest abuse which has emerged in the revelations over the last few days, and that's flipping from one home to the other to avoid capital gains tax.
Nick, you said on the TV debate on Thursday night that what I've supported all my adult life is a complete clean-up from top to toe of politics. Yet in your own expenses claims, you regularly claim more than Gordon Brown or David Cameron. You claim for £5,000 for a new kitchen, a gardener to prune your apple and plum trees, a handyman to build a wall for your rose garden, a shopping trip to IKEA for cushions, napkins and a cake pan. That doesn't sound like you spent all your adult life trying to clean things up.
It was a nihilistic outburst of acquisitive crime.
Not a good day for the Tories. No wonder David Cameron, leaving home, looked like he'd rolled out of the wrong side of bed.
Well, I am angry about what has happened. It is out of order. Some of this is an abuse of taxpayers' money, and I'm going to deal with it. But yes, I was claiming a large amount.
There's black ink all over the version of MP's receipts published today. It's all you were ever meant to see.
That was thieving. It's no good trying to blame that on someone else. All irresponsibility should be punished. There are MPs in prison, and a damn good thing too, excuse my
But most of them were allowed to pay back what they had taken wrongly.
Those
these
that broke
people
the
are
law
being thrown into jail for what they did.
And explained that there's one particular bill I've paid back money for. There's no new information in what's come out today. I've always been very clear about what I've claimed for and when I claimed for it and all the rest of it.
It was essential maintenance on my house. Water was coming through my loft and down the wall of my sitting room.
I have to have two homes. Consequently, the cleaning and the maintenance and the overkeep and the looking after has to be done by somebody.
But yes, I was claiming a large amount.
What a lot of self-serving double standards.
But yes, I was claiming a large amount. It's the next big scandal waiting to happen. It's an issue that, frankly, crosses party lines and has tainted our politics for too long. It's an issue that exposes the far too cosy relationship between politics, government, business and money. I'm talking about lobbying, and we all know how it works. The lunches, the hospitality, the quiet word in the ear, the ex-ministers and ex-advisors for hire, helping big businesses find the right way to get its way.
Thank you, Andrew. Good morning. The Conservatives' chief fundraiser has resigned after he was secretly filmed offering access to the Prime Minister in exchange for a substantial donation. The party's co-treasurer, Peter Cruddas, made the remarks to undercover reporters from the Sunday Times. He's described his actions as bluster and said he deeply regretted any impression of impropriety.
What a complete nonsense! And I have this very clear message to those people who are responsible for this wrongdoing and criminality. You will feel the full force of the law. And if you are old enough to commit these crimes, you are old enough to face the punishments.
But the PM also keen to stress the need to put an end to so-called banker bashing.
They've got to be successful banks. They've got to be, good performing banks. And I want to be able to sell them back into the private sector, to pay the taxpayer back their hard-earned money that they put into those banks. And we won't do that if we micromanage them on a daily basis. It is all too clear that we have a big problem with gangs in our country. For too long, there's been a lack of focus on the complete lack of respect shown by these groups of thugs.
Yes, let go, let go! Taser, taser, taser!
Nice!
The Bullingdon Club, I mean, that's a youthful gang, you could almost call it, engages in violent behaviour. We all do stupid things when we're young, we should learn the lesson. Did you witness stuff as a member of that club that was in it? Did you witness people throwing things through windows, smashing up restaurants? No, I didn't. And as I said, you didn't. we all do stupid things when we're young. And I think that's clear.
Lack of proper parenting, a lack of proper upbringing, a lack of proper ethics, a lack of proper morals. That is what we need to change. But yes, I was claiming a large amount.
What a lot of self-serving double standards.
Tonight, British forces are in action over Libya. They are part of an international coalition that has come together to enforce the will of the United Nations and to protect the Libyan people. Mr. Speaker, it is clear this is an illegitimate regime that has lost the consent of its people.
The Leveson inquiry has exposed the manipulative behavior of British newspapers, and the government. David Cameron still insists there was no deal between himself and News Corporation. The newspaper headlines at the time tell a different story. You do not have to be a conspiracy theorist to think it looks like David Cameron and the Conservative Party have used News Corporation to propagate the Conservative Party in exchange for allowing the News Corporation Sky takeover to go ahead. Blatantly illegal actions from both News Corporation and the British government. What's the point in having the right to vote when the media are working for the government, being used as a propaganda tool instead of doing its job of keeping people informed on policies and current affairs, and the truth about the people and policies they are voting for, allowing people to make their minds up based on policies and not based on propaganda and lies. Controlling nearly all mainstream media is not enough. Rupert Murdoch and David Cameron also want internet censorship. Rupert Murdoch has tweeted his support for the anti-piracy legislation, the Stop Online Piracy Act. The News International chief executive wrote on Twitter, "Don't care about people not buying movies, programs or newspapers, just stealing them." Murdoch tweeted, "So Obama has thrown in his lot with Silicon Valley paymasters who threaten all software creators with piracy, plain thievery." He also tweeted, "The piracy leader is Google, who streams movies free, sells adverts around them. No wonder pouring millions into lobbying." Murdoch, who himself sells government propaganda with adverts around it, and the government want full internet censorship so they can make even more money, and manipulate the internet like they do the mainstream media.
There is nothing wrong with your television. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. We are now controlling the transmission. We control the horizontal and the vertical. We can deluge you with 1,000 channels, or expand one single image to crystal clarity and beyond. We can shape your vision to anything our imagination can conceive. We will control all that you see and hear.
Free flow of information can be used for good, but it can also be used for ill. So we are working with the police, the intelligence services and industry to look at whether it would be right to stop people communicating via these websites and services when we know they are plotting violence, disorder and criminality. I've also asked the police if they need any other new powers. Specifically on face masks, currently they can only ask for these to be removed in a specific geographical location and for a limited time. So I can announce today that we are going to give the police the discretion to require the removal of face coverings under any circumstances where there is reasonable suspicion that they are related to criminal activity.
The Bureau of Investigative Journalism, a not-for-profit organization that examined records of donations held by the Electoral Commission and Companies House. The Bureau said, more than half of donations to the Conservative Party last year came from the City of London, firms and individuals donated £11.4 million in 2010, bringing the total from the city since David Cameron became leader to more than £42 million. The research found the majority of big city donors were hedge fund managers and brokers. The government denied claims that donors are influencing policy, but the City of London do not just give away £42 million for nothing. Big corporations funding for and controlling government policy undermines the right to vote. The Conservative Party is funded for by a very small amount of very rich people. They rely on lobbying just to survive.
Will the Minister for the Cabinet Office accept it is completely inadequate, given the scale of these allegations, for an investigation into what happened to be conducted by the Conservative Party? A Conservative peer appointed by the Prime Minister. An inquiry into the Conservative Party by the Conservative Party for the Conservative Party. It is a whitewash and everyone knows it.
Does the Cabinet Office Minister understand that when stories such as this emerge, it only confirms what we in Liverpool already know? The Tories aren't interested in ordinary people. They're only interested in buying favour and making their rich friends even richer.
There's a lot of synthetic nonsense about this, that the party opposite has its snout in the trough far worse than we ever have, and that the Prime Minister is to be commended for his honesty and straightforwardness and his transparency in revealing all the people he's met.
At school we are told that Great Britain is a free country. That's what makes Britain great: openness in our government, a free media and freedom of speech, in the famous words of John Fitzgerald Kennedy.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are as a people, inherently and historically, opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment.
David Cameron claims openness and transparency is at the heart of his agenda. Yet David Cameron wants the power to secretly take people to court. He had his secret meetings with Rebecca Brooks, Rupert Murdoch, and other million-slash-billionaires. Mr. Carruthers, a man that donated £382,451 to the Conservative Party, was secretly filmed telling undercover reporters he could arrange private meetings with senior Conservatives. David Cameron is a Freemason, so he has taken a secret oath to fellow members of the secret society that have 250,000 members in England and Wales and 6 million around the world. Secret intelligence services, secret police, secret intelligence units, set up to spy on left-wing and right-wing political groups. And do not ask who owns the Bank of England, because it's a secret. According to Wikipedia, the Bank of England was originally a private bank, which contracted to lend money to the British government in a financial crisis. It was privately owned and remained so until 1946, when the post-war Labour government nationalised it. In 1977, The bank set up a wholly owned subsidiary called Bank of England Nominees Limited, a private limited company, with 2 of its £100 shares issued. According to its memorandum and articles of association, its objectives are to act as nominee or agent or attorney either solely or jointly with others, for any person or persons, partnership, company, corporation, government, state, organization, sovereign, province, authority, or public body, or any group or association of them. It goes on to say, Bank of England Nominees Limited was granted an exemption by Edmund Dell, Secretary of State for Trade, from the disclosure requirements under Section 27 of the Companies Act 1976, because it was considered undesirable that the disclosure requirements should apply to certain categories of shareholders. The Bank of England is also protected by its Royal Charter status and the Official Secrets Act.